Are you excited to move to Florida?
I'm excited to get a permanent job. I don't know about moving to Florida, part of it.
But aren't you gonna be closer to your wife?
Yeah, but my wife's only gonna be at that job. She's only gonna be in Tampa until December, and she's gonna release back to she got called up for a year. Yeah.
Oh, well.
But yes, I'm excited to be closer to her for that time, yeah.
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah. All right. So, welcome back, everybody. So, today we're starting a new topic, animal ethics. And animal ethics is the question of how, how and if and how much ethical principles apply to the non-human animals that are out there sharing the world with us, right? So we're going to start by discussing a classic paper that was part of Peter Singer's work on animal ethics, and this work has had major impacts way outside of philosophy. It's been very influential, really opened a lot of people's, changed a lot of people's opinions, right? And All Animals Are Equal, it's a paper that if you read it, I hope you found it really challenging. Not in the sense that the paper itself is hard. The paper is very easy to understand, but it challenges a lot of deeply ingrained beliefs that a lot of us have, and it challenges a lot of the way that our society works, okay? So it's challenging in that respect, and that's what ethics is all about. It's about asking these questions, right? So I want to talk briefly about the background of this paper and the practices that Singer was talking about, because a lot of us don't know, all right? So most of us are aware that animals are killed to produce food, but most of us don't really know about the scale and the severity of the suffering that is inflicted on animals in modern society, right? When I say animals, of course, I mean non-human animals. So animals in our society, they're treated as a consumable resource. They're treated the way that coal or oil or timber is treated, right? And they have they're treated like they have no worth, and they have no moral or legal consideration except for as a resource to be owned, to be used, and to make a profit from. And whether you agree with Singer or not, that fact requires you should really think about that. It requires careful consideration, right? Animals, they're conscious and they're self-aware, and that makes them different than a piece of coal or a barrel of oil or a piece of timber, right? So, in fact, non-human animals are fundamentally different from any other aspect of the world that we live in, and that suggests that they should be treated differently than other aspects of the world. That animals clearly, like a pig, is clearly different than a barrel of oil as far as what's going on inside of them, but they're treated the same way, right? So each one of us partially acknowledges this difference, but we're extremely inconsistent in our behavior, right? I should say our stated attitudes are generally not consistent with our behavior, right? So in every state in America, there's laws against cruelty to animals. There's no laws against cruelty to rocks or cruelty to your car, right? And most people will instinctively hold back from personally inflicting pain or death on an animal. They won't do it, right? But we do live in a society where cruelty to animals is practiced on like an industrial scale, an enormous industrial scale, and at least indirectly we all participate in that, right? So Singer was mostly concerned with factory farming. Is that a term that most of you are familiar with? Okay, so And that was something that became a widespread practice in the 50s, but it's still not well known or understood by the general public, even though it's been going on for about 70 years. And I think that this is important because, as Rachel said in his book when he was talking about utilitarianism, most of us only have a very vague idea where our food comes from, right? And I want to be clear, like, what we're talking about. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit, right? And although Singer does talk about other kinds of animal cruelty, it's factory farming that he was specifically opposed to. And he was one of the very first people to try to bring public attention to what actually happens on factory farms. He was actually the person who introduced that term, factory farming. So, for example, what's called sow confinement. Sow confinement is a common practice in the United States and Europe. It's banned, there's been legislation to ban it in a lot of states, but it's only passed in California. The sows are female pigs that are used to breed piglets for bacon and pork. As soon as they're old enough to be bred, they're artificially impregnated. They make them pregnant artificially. During the time that they're pregnant, they're kept in cages that are so tight that they can't turn their head, and that's so uncomfortable for the sow that they bite down on the bars of the cage until their mouths bleed. And when the piglets are born, the sows and the piglets are moved to slightly larger cages until the piglets are weaned. Then the sow is immediately made pregnant again, put back in one of the smaller cages, and the cycle starts again. So that constant confinement and the repeated back-to-back pregnancies, they wear the sow out physically, and when they're 3 to 4 years old, they're too spent to continue, and then they're killed. So the piglets that are produced for food, they're killed at 6 months old. The natural life expectancy of a pig is 20 years. So slaughter of pigs, it's an assembly line procedure. A lot of the time they're gassed. They're gassed to be killed. That's been described as like burning to death from the inside out. All right. So domestic chickens that are bred for meat, they're what are called broiler chickens. And broiler chicken, they've been bred and genetically manipulated to grow much faster and to become much heavier than their wild counterparts are. And that way they provide more meat faster and cheaper to meet the demand for, like the 99-cent chicken sandwiches at Chick-fil-A or like whatever they have there, right? So the frame of a broiler chicken's body is not designed to hold this kind of weight, and they have difficulty standing up, and their legs a lot of times they just break under the strain, right? So a while back, neuroscientists who were interested in the question of whether birds can feel pain at all, given the fact that their organization of their brain is much different than a mammal's brain. And so what they looked at was broiler chickens. It was a very natural thing to look at because the build of their limbs is such that, and their bodies is such that if they were a mammal, they would be in constant pain their entire life. And the conclusion was like, yeah, birds can feel pain, and broiler chickens are in constant pain and severe pain throughout their entire life. So these chickens are raised in very cramped conditions. Most of the time they can never spread their wings. They never have enough room to spread their wings. And the only time that they see sunlight is when they're taken to be slaughtered at about 6 weeks old. So estimates are that in the United States alone, the number of chickens who live and die in those kind of conditions, it's 9 billion a year. And those conditions are so bad that hundreds of millions of them die of the sickness and the overcrowding before they're slaughtered, so nobody even eats them, right? Now, Singer and other advocates of animal welfare, they're not only against the meat industry, but they're against any kind of use of animals in food production, right? And why would that be? Well, consider, for example, the way that the dairy industry works. so dairy companies, they cultivate this image, like, you buy like milk and it's got a picture of like a cow in like a green pasture, it's like a smiling cow and stuff. That's virtually never the case. In the milk that you would buy in a supermarket, that's not how it's made, right? So cows, just like any other mammal, they don't just walk around giving milk out, right? No mammal does that. The females don't just produce milk, okay? They'll only make milk when they're pregnant and for a little while after they've given birth. So that means like the sows, the dairy cow has to be kept in a state of constant pregnancy, otherwise it's not doing the owner any good. The owner can't make any money off of her. And animal rights advocates will point out that causing non-consensual pregnancy, even in a cow, that's morally problematic. That doesn't seem like a very, maybe kind of a problematic thing to do, right? Now, obviously, the reason that this cow is producing milk is for her calf, right? But the calf, they can't allow the calf to drink it because they need that milk to sell. So within a couple of days after it's born, once she starts producing milk, the calf is separated from the mother. The mothers go crazy they go crazy when their calf is taken away. They'll throw themselves against the wall of their cages over and over again, like, trying and against fences or whatever's around. The calves are treated as an industrial byproduct or industrial waste. The dairy farms are the main suppliers of the veal industry. In the veal industry, the calves are kept in boxes that are so small, bare boxes that are so small they can't turn around, because if they can move, their meat won't be tender. So dairy cows, they're weakened and exhausted by these back-to-back pregnancies, and they're killed at about 4 years old. That's a quarter of their natural life expectancy, right? So it's those kinds of methods that we've just discussed and other similar methods which are practiced in the industrial use of animals for food production that were Singer's main target in his paper, but he's also against unnecessary animal testing, right? So the thing is, most people claim to be against factory farming. When they do like surveys, most people are like, yeah, I don't like that stuff. I wish they didn't do it, right? But, and they also claim to be against unnecessary animal testing. They say like, yeah, that's terrible that they test like eyeliners on rabbits and it kills them and stuff like that. But the average person's eating and buying habits, they do not reflect their stated attitudes, right? They say one thing, but then they go to the supermarket and they do another. So, people are inconsistent in their attitudes and the way that they act, right? And that's kind of true of ethics in general. Like people, what they say and what they do are often very different, but the difference is especially stark in this area, okay? All right, now Singer, as a utilitarian, believes that anything that causes suffering is, so you guys remember Singer's a utilitarian, everybody remembers that, right? So he believes that anything that causes suffering is bad, and if you can, you want to eliminate any suffering that you encounter, unless doing so would bring about more suffering than you would be eliminating, right? And the suffering that's caused by factory farming, it's unquestionably enormous. It's terrible. So Singer argues this kind of practice cannot be justified because there are viable alternatives. You don't need any of that stuff, right? So anyway, so you may wonder, what about what's called humane meat, right? And humane meat is meat that is supposedly taken from animals who've kind of like had a natural happy life. They're kind of just allowed to roam around and do their thing until they round them up and they kill them, right? So in theory, and Singer acknowledges this, he says in theory his argument leaves some room for that as a viable option, right? But in practice, it's basically impossible to harvest animals profitably in that way, right? On a scale, on any kind of scale, right? So that's why factory farming exists, because people can't really make money doing that, right? All right, so the practical conclusion is that we should refrain from eating animal products altogether. All right, so this is Singer's conclusion. I shouldn't say humans, I should say we. He's talking to the citizens of the first world, you know, America, Australia, UK, right? All right, so that's the background, all right? That's the background of Singer's ideas, right? So we understand where he's coming from and what he's talking about, all right? So let's talk about the paper now, okay? So it's kind of like a bedrock of moral theory. All human beings should be treated equally, all right? So that's something that pretty much everybody agrees with. Like, you're not going to find too many people. Again, you know, what people say and what they do is often kind of inconsistent, but most people will at least say that this is right, okay? And so there might be important differences in the specifics of treatment, right? Like, you don't let a 5-year-old vote in national elections, right? You don't let a blind person drive cars. So there's kind of differences there. But as far as moral concern, yeah, you treat everybody equally. You treat them all with the same kind of moral concern. It doesn't matter if it's a child, if they're blind, black, white, man, woman, everybody gets the same kind of moral concern, right? So, why do you think that is? Why is it that every person, every individual person gets the same kind of moral consideration? Why do we treat everybody equally? Sure, Bryden.
Because one person's interests are not more important than another's.
One person said, why is that? Why do you think that is, though? I think in a sense you're restating the question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why? Why is one person's interest not any more important than anybody else's? All right. Do we all agree that people should be treated equally? I hope so. Okay. And I hope we can act on that and not just say it, because a lot of people just say it. But why do you think that is? Why do people get treated equally? Why should we do that? All right. What do you think the first thing that's going to pop into most people's heads is?
Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Well, okay, but why should we support? I mean, yeah, that's a good. Okay, yeah, but why should we support that? Yeah, cool.
Self-interest.
Well, I mean, that could be part of it, right? We want people to treat us equally, right? Okay, so, all right, a very common answer to this that people will say is they'll say, look, well, we all are equal, right? Okay, so that's kind of an answer people would give sometimes. Why do we treat people equally? We're all equal, okay? Singer points out that is a very naive answer, okay? Because it's just not true at all. People are not equal, okay? People are not the same, all right? So some humans, they're naturally smarter. Some of them are more athletically gifted. Some of them are more artistically talented. Some of them are kinder. They're nicer. And there's some people, they're just lucky or they're hardworking and they're just better at a lot of stuff than other people are, right? We all know people like that, right? So does that seem right to everybody? Like, it can't be, we want to treat people equally. It can't be because we're all equal, because we're not. right? Does everybody get that? Okay, but we still, you guys still feel like, look, you may have somebody who's like, or she's like an amazing athlete, she's super smart, she's really nice, but is she like morally better than like other people? Does she count for more? We kind of have this feeling that maybe not, like even, especially like under the law, she should be the same, right? Okay, so it's this question, why is that, right? So it's definitely not true that humans are all equal, right? But at the same time, most of us feel like it should be the case that all of these people, with all of their variations and their assets and their shortcomings, they get equal moral consideration, right? So it can't be actual equality between human beings that requires us to treat them equally, so it's got to be something else, right? So the question is, what is this something else? Okay, so if you were like really utilitarian, what do you think the answer to that would be? Yeah, Max?
Because if you don't treat everyone equally, then it's not like the ideal amount of happiness.
Right, being treated equally makes people happy, right? Being discriminated against makes people unhappy, right? Okay. And what's good or bad to a utilitarian? Being happy or not being happy. What's good, being good is being what's good is being happy, and what's bad is suffering or not being happy, right? So, okay, so let's move. This is about individuals. Right now we're talking about individuals, right? So let's move a step past that, and I think we can all agree as well. Okay, so everybody who's worth listening to, who's not like a crackpot these days, they agree that it is wrong to discriminate on the basis of features like race or gender, right? It's kind of like a baseline, okay? Now again, people say what they do is often different, but everybody's gonna at least say that, right? Okay, so why do you think that is? Why do you think that's the case? Why is it wrong to be racist or to be sexist? Has nobody even thought about that, or? Yeah.
I feel like it's wrong because one is wrong, but two, like,
Well, I mean, yeah, we all agree that it's wrong, but like, we can't just,
how can you feel like you're better than, like, as a man, how can you feel like you're better than a woman because you're a man? Or if we're two different colors, how can you feel like, since you're one color,
Yeah.
you're better than another color?
Well, let me ask you a question though, right? So that's what a lot of people say, is they say like, yeah, we're all equal, right? Nobody's better than anybody else, right? And that's right. Okay, so like in this case, like, yeah, like nobody's better, no race is better, no gender is better, right? But like, what if they were, right? Like, what if women were better than man? Like, what if women were smarter than man? Would it be okay to discriminate?
No.
Okay, so yeah, so that's what Singer wants you to see, is like, yeah, you're right. Like, races are equal, genders are equal. But if they weren't, it would still be wrong to discriminate, right? Did you guys get that? So it wouldn't be. That can't be it. That can't be why, right? So here, you're on better grounds when you say like, yeah, we're all equal, right? individuals can vary a lot in their intelligence, but there don't seem to be any, intelligence and other factors like athleticism or whatever, but there's not differences like that across races or sexes, right? So yeah, races and sexes are equal in all important ways. I mean, some of them are like taller than others or whatever, but that's not like really, like who cares, right? So like in all important ways, they're the same, right? And Singer says like, yeah, that's correct, right? Races and sexes are equal in every important respect as far as anyone can measure, and that's as much of a solid fact in science as like the distance to the sun is, right? But that cannot be the actual reason that we treat all human beings, male or female or whatever races, as equal. That's not it, right? Singer saying equality is not why discrimination is wrong. All right, that's not it. Okay. So, Singer, he says, try to imagine for a second, try to imagine that wasn't true, right? And try to imagine that different types of people were not, in fact, equal, right? And think about whether that would change your moral attitudes or whether you think that all human beings should be treated equally, right? So what if let's just say they found out that like people from Guam were like smarter than anybody else. And they're just like the master race, all right? Would it be right for them to like discriminate against everybody else? Would it? All right. Does anybody think so? Okay, why not? Why would it be wrong? What's that show you? What does thinking about that show you? Yeah.
Going back to your thing about women being smarter and it wouldn't be okay to discriminate against them. Don't we do that now?
No, I said, what if women found out they were smarter?
Right, and like,
would they discriminate? Would it be okay for them to discriminate against men?
like in the sense of like job opportunities, I think so. Like,
Okay, hold on. Man, I think women are discriminated against.
right.
So I'm saying like, okay, look, just
And
imagine.
hypothetical.
Hold on. Imagine like hypothetically, like science fiction. It turned out that like women were smarter than men are, and they took everything over and they were running everything, right? Would it be wrong for them to discriminate against men and like not give them jobs?
Well, in the sense of like higher up jobs where if they're smarter and they're in government, or I think that if you're smarter, you should have those government jobs.
Okay,
in that sense,
yeah, but that's an individual qualification for a job, right? Would it be right for them to say like we're not going to let man work in government at all, even if they're like really smart, even if they're really smart man?
But if all women are smarter than all men, I mean.
No, that's not what was suggested. It's like if they're smarter, like in the sense that they're
Just in general.
yeah, in general,
Okay.
yeah. Like I mean, realistically, so suppose, okay, look. So there's one thing that as far as anybody can figure out, men are better at women than doing, and that's like rotating 3D objects in space in their head. Like man, for some reason, men are better at that. Okay, that's true. All right. So, man, a lot of times, men find it easier to like design things like machines and things like that. Okay. Now, there are women who are like really good at that. Okay. Should they be denied the chance to be like an engineer?
Not necessarily.
Yeah, so that's what Singer's like asking.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So we wouldn't wanna blame, yeah, like if there's two people and one of them's just better at that than the other, they're gonna get the job. That's not really discrimination, that's picking the best person for the job. But if you have like a blanket statement that like women are not allowed to have those jobs, you know, it's like in the military for a long time, like women weren't allowed to go to like ranger school, right? And granted, there's, like, you have to do six pull-ups to get into that school, right? The number of women who can do that versus the number of men, it's a lot lower, okay? But for a long time, they were just like, women can't even go here, they can't even come here, and then they were like, you know, wait, if they can do 6 pull-ups, then screw it, they can come, like, and why not? Why shouldn't that opportunity be open to them? All right, does everybody kind of get what he's talking about? All right. So we should kind of make sure we understand what he's saying here, right? So things here that are a lot more complicated than they seem when we kind of talk about equality, right? Because the evidence here, it can be a little bit hard to make sense out of. There are experiments and statistical studies that seem to show real and important differences in ability between the sexes and between various ethnic groups, all right? So people will point to studies and they'll say, look, this shows this group of people is like smarter than another, all right? So I'll give you one example. Between 1967 and 2016, high school boys averaged 527 on the math portion of the SAT. High school girls averaged 496, all right? This is an older version of the SAT. It's not the one you're used to. It was scored differently, all right? So that's pretty representative of standardized math testing in the US since it was first introduced. I can find a lot of examples like that. I don't need to repeat them here. But when you look closely at that statistic, what do you think you find? What do you think is causing that difference? Do you think it's that women are not as good at math as men are?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. What do you think's going on?
I mean, from like my perspective as a woman, like we're always taught that like from a very young age, like women aren't good at math.
Yes,
So
yeah.
it internalizes that we aren't good at math. And that's why typically women's math scores are lower than men's.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Okay, so, and that's the same thing with all of these studies. Like when you control for factors, like, social factors like the economic status of different groups or the way they're treated, these differences go away, right? So women in the United States are discouraged from studying math. That happens even at the college level. It's kind of subtle, more subtle than it used to be, but it still goes on, all right? And that difference, it's a consequence of that different kind of teaching. And you can corroborate this explanation against worldwide data. The difference between man and woman in math scores, where do you think it's largest? What countries do you think it's the highest in?
Here.
Yeah, no, well, it's higher than you'd think here, but it's not, by far not the highest,
You
yeah.
said the difference is higher?
Yeah, where do you think the difference is highest?
Like the Middle East?
Yeah, like the Middle East, exactly. Like Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, places where, there's places where the treatment of boys, of men and women is very different in the way that they're educated is very different, you know. Like in Afghanistan, women can't even go to school past the 5th grade, right? Like obviously they're not gonna do as well on math tests, right? Where do you think is lowest? But yeah, in Europe, like in Sweden, where they have very strictly mandated equal treatment, there is no difference. There's no difference at all, right? The only difference, again, it's the ability to rotate 3D objects in space, right? So okay. So anyway, today, in 2024, we are assured that races and sexes are equal as about anything in the sciences, right? So what was Singer, Singer wrote this in 1974, what was he saying, right? So he said, first of all, in 1974, he was certain that future scientific methods would conclusively show that all groups of people are actually equal, right? So now we know that on the basis of like a lot of genetic evidence and like really heavy testing. In 1974, a lot of people thought that was the case, but they didn't really have like hard evidence to show it, right? So Singer was saying, again, he's speaking in 1974, and he's saying future science will show, once and for all, that all groups of people are equal. Right? It's going to show that, right? But he says, like, look, if that doesn't turn out like I think it's going to, who cares? Who cares, right? If it turned out that one race or one sex was better in some way, is that going to make a difference in how you treat people? And Singer says, of course it's not. It's not going to make any difference at all in how much moral consideration you give people, right? And, so he says, if not, who cares, right? Racism and sexism you're still wrong, right? It doesn't matter if it doesn't matter if it turns out that somebody's smarter than somebody else on average or more athletic or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's still wrong, okay? All right. So, do you guys all kind of get what he's saying? Do you get where he's coming from? Okay, where do you think he's going with this? I mean, obviously, does it seem like we're kind of off topic right now? All right, yeah, this will come together in a minute, all right? So, all forms, he's saying like all forms of, if this happened, like all forms of racism and sexism, they'd still be just as wrong as they are now. Your moral common sense tells you that. You do not need a complicated philosophical argument to that effect, all right? So more recently, science has gotten a lot better. We have methods that we didn't have in the 70s, and they pretty much laid this question to rest. We know groups are equal, right? But you can still think about, like, what if, right? What if you found out that your race or your sex was better? Would you start to discriminate? Would it be okay if some other group that found out they were better were discriminating against you? And, most people say no, right? Like, it's just kind of seems like common sense. It's not going to make any difference into how you treat people or how you expect to be treated, right? Discrimination's still wrong. You still take everybody's interests into account equally. And Singer feels like this intuition, it brings you to a very important point, right? So what we learn from this fact is, again, equality is not why discrimination is wrong, okay? Like, yeah, people are equal, but that is not why we don't discriminate. It's not because of equality, right? So, because if we didn't have equality, we still wouldn't discriminate. So whatever the reason is, it's not that, right? So, all right. So, okay. So are we all on board with Singer so far? Does this seem right? Okay. So at this point, somebody might object to Singer, and they'd say, yeah, okay, that's fine. So far, you're talking about different groups of people. This paper is not about, you didn't start out by talking about people, you're talking about animals. Obviously where you're going with this is something about animal rights, okay? So they'd say, look, somebody is a critic of Singer, right? They might say, look, any conceivable gap that you can even imagine existing between groups of human beings is going to be much, much smaller than what we know exists. We know for a fact exists between humans and all other species, okay? So somebody who's a critic of Singer that making sense? Yeah. Okay, so they might say, look, yeah, you know, there might, like, say it turned out like a woman had an IQ, like, on average, like 10 points higher than a man. That wouldn't be any reason to discriminate, but like a human, you know, humans, our IQ on average is like, you know, like 80 points high. As far as you, I don't know if you can like meaningfully measure the IQ of like a dog or something, but, you know, like the IQ of a, you Peyton?
Yeah,
you?
I emailed
Yeah,
you.
I know, I'm sorry, I haven't had time to read my
No,
email
you're
this
fine.
afternoon,
Took me
but
2
I did
hours
see
to
you
get
got one.
here from school.
Well, I'm glad you're here. Okay, so, humans, their IQ on average is like 100, it's, you know, it's like way higher than like a dog or a monkey's, right? Okay, so the idea is maybe this very large gap is morally significant. Maybe that matters. Okay, does everybody kind of get that? Right, so maybe a little gap doesn't matter, a big gap like between a human and a cow, that's important, right? What do you think, what do you think Singer would say back to that? What it says back, what does it say back to that? Yeah,
What about, because it seems like certain humans have pretty big gaps between them. Like a kid with like Down syndrome or something versus like a really, really high
yeah.
IQ person.
Did you hear what he's saying? Yeah, what were you gonna say, Cole?
Same thing, so.
Yeah, okay, so I would put that a little bit differently. Humans have a very broad range of abilities, right? So this is true, this is generally true. But not always, right? So somebody who's got this point of view, somebody who has this point of view, they are kind of pushing the idea of like the social contract theorist, where it's only like the rational beings matter, or like Kant's idea that humans, they matter and animals don't matter because humans are rational and animals are not. And this is subject to that same criticism that you can apply to both of those theories when they try to restrict moral worth to like rational beings or beings that are at a certain level of intelligence, right? So, as a species, considered on average, typical members, you know, considering like average typical members, that's definitely true. Humans are much smarter and more rational than any non-human, but if you zoom in closer, you start to see a lot of exceptions to this rule, right? Very young children, who's smarter, like a six-month-old boy or a dog? Or like a German Shepherd?
No.
Probably. What about like a 6-month-old boy or like a chimpanzee? Chimpanzee, clearly, right? So very young children, they're less intelligent and they're less rational in their behavior than animals like a dog or a horse or a pig or a octopus, let alone like a chimpanzee or a crow or a dolphin. Crows are like very, very intelligent, right? The crows use tools to make other tools. That's pretty advanced, right? So farther, you know, there's some unfortunate human beings. They're never going to get past that stage of development, right? They might have had some serious accident. They were born with some kind of bad brain condition that limited their development. How do we treat people in those categories? Do they get moral consideration? Well, I mean, do we at least say, I mean, yeah, okay, so again, what people say and what they do is kind of different, but do we at least say that they get it? Yeah, right? So we don't give them full rights, all right? So rights are different than moral treatment, okay? So like, you don't let like a 6-month-old child vote. If somebody is like severely mentally disabled enough, they're not gonna get a driver's license. But we definitely do not disregard their moral interests. If anything, we treat them like they're more important than the way that we typically treat human beings. They get more care, right? So the point is that there's people who are less intelligent than many animals are, less rational, and we don't treat those people the way that we do animals. Like we do not put them in a gas chamber to make bacon out of them, right? That would be considered unacceptable. So, okay. So we don't treat people who are less intelligent as if they were not morally valuable, right? So where's Singer going? Yeah, Cole?
Sorry, this is a bit off topic, but considering this, like, what would Singer's opinion on the baby Teresa case be?
Singer's like super he's utilitarian, right? So you can just put that together, right? So Singer says she has no interests, you know.
Is it because, like, she can, or,
It's because so she can't suffer, she can't be happy. So like,
okay.
yeah. So Singer's views on medical stuff are like very permissive. He's really like very pro-choice and very like pro euthanasia. You know, so like, yeah, he's very utilitarian, Like you can pretty much predict what he's going to say by just asking yourself, what would a utilitarian say? You know, not a lot of surprises. Okay, so yeah, it's kind of one of my professors when I was a grad student was a TA for him at Princeton. Like you have to go through a metal detector to get to his office. Because people don't like him. They don't like Peter Singer. Yeah. My goal is to never be a professor who you need a metal detector. I mean, I got opinions obviously, but like you know, I hope nobody ever has to go through a metal detector to come to my office hours. All right. So this is just once again what Singer's trying to do here is to show that equality, especially in terms of intelligence or rationality, that cannot be the reason why it's wrong to discriminate. That's not it, right? And why we give moral consideration to all human beings. But it looks like right now we kind of have a problem here because we want to say that all humans deserve equal moral consideration. I think we all kind of feel in our gut that that's right, I hope, but it's hard to say why, right? Why do people get equal moral consideration? Because it's not because all individuals are equal, because all individuals are not equal. It's not because the races and sexes and other groups they belong to are equal, because they are, but if they weren't, that wouldn't change anything in the way that we treat people from these different groups, right? And it's not because we're smarter than non-humans, because that's generally true, but it's not 100% true. So what is the thing, what's the equalizer? What is it that makes it so that we all should be treated the same? All right, so one kind of response to this is, it's because we're humans, right? And people say that sometimes. They say this, you know, it's a human. This is a human being. This is not, right? So they say humans have intrinsic value, right? They say humans have intrinsic value, right? And the idea is that because all human beings have this special intrinsic value, we're all to be treated equally, but at the same time, no other thing in the universe gets this kind of special treatment, all right? So, believe it or not, a lot of philosophers have actually gone that route from like the Middle Ages right up until now, all right? And they said like, you know, humans have like this special dignity or whatever, right? As Singer says, look, you know, Singer points out like, look, that's pretty suspect, okay? Like humans have an intrinsic value. Saying that humans are special because they're humans, that's very weak, it's very lazy. But it's also circular. Have you guys ever heard the term circular argument? Right, so you're assuming what you're trying to prove, you know, all right. So saying that humans are better because they're humans, that's like saying I'm right because I'm right, okay? All right, so according to Singer, why do we treat all human beings equally? Why do we treat all human beings equally? We give all human beings equal consideration because every human being who is not literally brain dead can suffer, right? Humans are equal in their ability to suffer, right? So that doesn't just mean in the ability to feel pain, but in the ability to suffer from discrimination, to have your basic needs and your basic freedoms limited, all right? So does that seem right? Are humans like pretty much alike in how they suffer? So does it seem right? So, Singer's concerned with suffering so much because he is a utilitarian, right? But you don't really need to be a utilitarian. You don't need to be any kind of particular moral theory at all to know that suffering is not good, suffering is bad, and you want less of it, right? You want less pain in the world, right? Does that seem right? You don't have to be a utilitarian to know that. Okay, so suffering is bad. Right? And who else human beings can suffer. Who else can suffer? Yep. And not only can they can suffer equally to human beings. In that respect, they're not different. They're not different than we are, right? So they can and they do suffer, and not only that, they suffer equally to humans. Their ability to feel pain is the same as yours. They're hooked up the same way, right? When they're in a slaughterhouse, they're afraid the same way a person would be afraid in that situation. They feel the same fear. They feel despair and hopelessness from confinement, like when that sow is in that cage and she can't turn her head. She suffers the same way a person would suffer if they were in a cage like that for year after year, right? All right, so you guys see where Singer's going with this? All right. So humans all receive equal moral consideration because they're all equal in their ability to suffer. Non-human animals can suffer just like humans can. They also should receive equal moral consideration. All right, is this making sense to everybody? All right. So the core part of Singer's argument, you can sum it up like this. So the ability to suffer, it's a sufficient condition to receive moral consideration because we want to reduce suffering as much as possible. We don't care about intelligence. We don't care about rationality any more than we care about like strength or speed or something like that. The ability to suffer is enough, right? Okay. Non-human animals can suffer equally to human beings. They suffer just as much from having their freedom taken away. They experience fear in the same way. And of course, the way that they feel physical pain is exactly the same. All right? So the conclusion is non-human animals deserve the same kinds of moral consideration that we would normally extend to a human being. Okay. All right. Okay, does everybody understand his argument? All right, do you think he's right? Do you think he's right? No? All right. So, one objection that a lot of people have to Singer's ideas, and this is particularly advocated by the meat industry, is that if you take Singer's advice, food's going to be more expensive. Okay? So this is something that you hear a lot. And you can ask, all right, so this argument's frequently heard whenever laws against sow confinement are proposed, and veal, pork, and egg industries, they use this argument against recent laws that were passed in California, which barred what's called extreme confinement, and that's keeping an animal in a cage so tight that it can't move its limbs, right? All right, so the problem is that argument is not good. It's not a good philosophical argument, and it's also a very bad practical argument in like economic terms, all right? So philosophically, it's question begging. It assumes that Singer and other animal rights advocates are wrong, okay? So Singer is saying that animals and humans deserve equal moral consideration. If you want to argue that animals should be farmed under inhumane conditions to provide cheaper meat, you have to establish why that massive suffering shouldn't be taken into account and balanced against the human desire to consume animal carcasses. You know, put another way, if Singer's right, animals, they're not food, and that's the end of the story, right? They're not our food. Okay, so the second problem is, so the first problem is, So if you wanna show this is right, you gotta show this is wrong first, otherwise it doesn't matter, it's a moot point, right? So the second problem is a matter of just like simple economics. It's not true that banning factory farming would make food more expensive. In fact, the opposite is true. Right? It's just not true. Okay? So, as Singer points out in the paper, banning factory farming or banning animal agriculture in general, it would not make food more expensive. On the contrary, it would make it cheaper. All right? So there's simply no way that it can ever be cheaper or more efficient to produce animal products than to not eat them. All right? So that's because, why do you think that is? All right, so an animal has to be kept alive for the entire time until she or he is big enough to be sent to slaughter, right? And that means that you have to feed that animal that entire time. So what are you feeding it? You're feeding it plants that could have been directly consumed by people, right? So statistics from like Yale University, they show that on average a cow's got to be fed 25 calories of plants to produce 1 calorie of beef, right? So instead of making 25 calories of like corn, you made 1 calorie of beef, right? And that's all food that could have just been consumed by humans directly. The most efficient kind of meat is chickens. A chicken requires 9 calories of food to produce 1 calorie of meat. So eating a chicken, it's like taking 1 plate of food and throwing 8 plates of food in the trash, okay? So animal agriculture is also extremely inefficient in terms of land and water. So statistics from the Public Water Administration in Denver, Colorado, they encourage people to consume less meat by pointing out that it takes they have a lot of droughts in Colorado. It takes 1,847 gallons of water to produce a pound of beef. It takes 115 gallons of water to produce a pound of vegetables. It takes 39 gallons to produce a pound of fruit. It takes 39 gallons to produce a pound of vegetables. So it's about almost 50 times as efficient in terms of water. So all of this inefficiency, right, all of this waste, it causes the price of food to go up because they're diverting resources, they're diverting land and water away from the production of food they're moving it to the production of food to feed animals meat and away from the production of food from humans. Yeah, Ruby?
What does he think about like people going like turkey hunting?
That's kind of a different question, right? But like, he would say, look, do you need that meat? No, so you just let the turkey do its thing, right?
Yeah, but other animals eat animals too.
Other animals do eat animals, but other kinds of animals. First of all, they don't eat, the animals that we eat don't eat other animals, right?
Yeah.
But also, he would say, look, you take like a cat, if it doesn't eat another animal, it's gonna die, right? Is a person gonna die if they don't eat meat? Right, yeah, so Singer would say, look, he's a utilitarian, he'd say, look, if there was people who were gonna die if they didn't eat meat, that's like a different story, but that's not the case, right?
I don't know, maybe if you like fed a cat with carrots and stuff.
It would die. I mean, no, look, I would say this, there is stuff you can feed a cat that would keep it alive, and you can put like chemicals in the food, right? But the reason that's never been developed is because it's cheaper. Like meat is so cheap because of factory farming. Like they have the capacity to make like cat food that, I mean, it's going to have some stuff in it that's not like entirely natural, but like you can make that kind of stuff. It's just not made because it's way cheaper to just get, because it's left over from like making human food. Yeah. All right. But yeah, if you feed a cat carrots, that's not going to end well. Right? Okay, so anyway, so the point is, like, if you're really concerned with like Ruby, I would say this. Let me say this really quick because this is kind of a complicated point. Singer doesn't think animals' lives are important to them, right? He thinks not suffering is important to them because like they don't really do things with their lives like the way humans do. Now, I think that's kind of a questionable point that Singer's making there, but that's his point of view, right? And So he said if there was a way that you could kill an animal with no suffering, and it doesn't suffer at all, it's never scared, it doesn't suffer, that's okay, right? But he just doesn't think that's possible to do, and it's really, I mean, even if you're turkey hunting, it kind of sucks to get shot, right? So, you know, that's his point. Yeah, Cole?
Is there a point where he holds animals morally accountable for their actions?
No, because they're not there. I mean, do you hold like a crazy person accountable? No, because like they're not a moral agent, right? Like you only hold people morally accountable under certain conditions, right? Animals don't meet those conditions. Yeah.
Yeah, what about like overpopulation of like, I don't know, like white-tailed deer? Like, what would he say about that? Like,
What would he say about that? Well, he'd say, look, you know, again, he's utilitarian. You know, so you gotta, I would hesitate to answer exactly for him. I've never like asked him that question, you know, but I think he would say, the point, if you're gonna, you wanna use whatever resources you can to try to control that a different way. And if it was some kind of situation where you absolutely need to control the population and there's no way you can do it without killing them, then you need to do it in like the most humane way possible. And like having people run around the woods and shoot at them is probably not that, right? Speaking of somebody who's got shot out in the woods, it kind of sucks. You know? Yeah. All right. So look, let me just wrap it. You guys are asking like really good questions right now. Let's just pick this up next Tuesday because I want to give you a quiz. Obviously, look, how many classes do we have left? 5, right? How many quizzes do we have left? Right. So you can put 2 and 2 together. Okay. But look, Singer's arguments are definitely radical. He's criticizing a lot of stuff that, he's criticizing a lot of things that we kind of take for granted. So, you know, we should look closely at what he's got to say. Next time, we're going to read this paper by Bonnie Steinbach. She's not really like, I wouldn't say she's like the opposite of Singer. That's definitely not true, but she's a little bit more moderate, all right? So let's see what Bonnie's got to say. Excuse me, Dr. Steinbach has got to say, okay? And once you're done with these, take off, have a great weekend, and I'll see you back here on Tuesday. We'll talk about Steinbach's, speciesism and the idea of inequality, okay? So whatever it is. I think that's what it's called. You guys need one more?
Oh, we have an extra.
Oh, okay. Just hang on to it. Do something cool with it. Yes, thank you. Yeah, you too. I like it. I like that paper.
Yes.
I'd be so fucking busy, boy. You think you'll get up with the